It's easy to say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and that beauty is a social construct, that it's to some extent specific to the culture you're living in. But if you just live in one culture, you may really be stuck with that struggle. You're stuck with the way you're perceived in that culture. I also think that in Western culture, we cultivate this misconception. It's a misconception we're proud of, that human attraction and pair bonding is based on the soul, or that it ought to be based on the soul. It ought to be based on who you really are. And we imagine who you really are is something totally different from just who you are. That combines with the anecdotal nature of, oh, this one time I had this one experience where this person really found me attractive. I had this one experience where this person fell in love with me. Like, you actually had a deeper connection with someone. And then adding to this delusion of those people who were really into me, it's because they could see who I really am. It's because they could see my soul. They saw something in me the other people didn't see. And I think that is wrong. But the real moral of the story of what I'm saying here is that the discipline of making sense out of your own love life is keeping the shallow things shallow, like appreciating the shallow side of human experience as shallow. If you're a cancer researcher, you do research to try to find the cure for cancer, and then you meet someone else who's also passionate about cancer research. How important is their physical appearance going to be? It's going to be different for every couple. It's going to be different for every person. Whether you're thinking about yourself, as a unique example in this process, or if you're scaling it up and thinking about society in general or life in general. Of course, if you care about something passionately, whether or not it's cancer research, whether or not it's, painting or what have you, whether or not it's politics or what have you, and you meet someone else who relates to you on that level, who has those common aspirations with you, there's a lot to love there. I mean, there's a lot of common ground to build on. And I do think it's something, if you are objectively ugly, which, plenty of people are, plenty of people live with that burden their whole lives, or if within your own culture you're considered ugly, you're within a culture where only tall, skinny people are considered attractive and you're not tall and skinny, whatever the case may be. Nevertheless, it seems so clear to me that the way forward is for you to find and build on some passionate direction of that kind, which is going to create the basis for those meaningful relationships. I think that a lot of people get behind this competitive view of evolutionary biology. Like, everyone's trying to be as pretty as possible, everyone's trying to be as handsome and as muscular as possible, and so on, because it gives them the comforting delusion that there's one finish line, one standard, one set of goalposts that we're all working towards. That presumes that you know the nature of the competition and you know what it is that you're competing for, right? I could not imagine the woman that YouTube brought into my life. Like, there was no way I could have contrived my life or put on a fake persona or done a fake career or anything to try to attract you as my partner, right? I can work on developing what I'm really interested and passionate about, and then I can find out who has common ground with me. Like, I didn't even know about you for the first couple months we were together, that one of the things you really related to was my interest in First Nations peoples. So Cree, Ojibwe, Dene, native peoples of Canada, native languages and stuff, right? And I'm coming here on YouTube just talking about that from the position of a failure. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, this is something I tried to do with my life, and it didn't work out. And that brought this woman in my life. That was one of the things that really turned her on about me, that she really related to positively, right? So nobody's going to give you that advice. Like, talk about your aspirations and failures and meet people who can relate positively to that aspiration and failure. But it's great advice.
À-bas-le-ciel.
One of the ideas that comes out of the philosophy of Karl Popper is just the extent to which empirical experience can lead us astray. So Karl Popper was a philosopher of science. Tried to make that into one word there. He was a philosopher of science, and naturally in the philosophy of science, a lot of people say, well, what's good about science is that it's based on what you see and hear and experience empirically. And Karl Popper was interested in kind of examples to the contrary. Well, empirical experience can lead you astray, and sometimes we have to reason things through in a more theoretical or abstract or philosophical sense in order to interpret what we see empirically. Now, like, a lot of people's relationship advice or how they live their own lives in terms of seeking a partner or having a partner, what have you, it's based on a few very powerful empirical experiences. Like it may be based on their own experience falling in love, which is maybe something they've done once in their life, maybe twice, maybe not even, right? At the time of this matters. It may be based on a friend of theirs falling in love. It may be based on someone else falling in love with them, or even just someone being attracted to you, which is really random and can be very misleading. Like, if you're not gorgeous, whether you're objectively ugly or you're objectively mediocre looking, you may have the experience that stands out in your mind of a few times in your life when somebody met you and for whatever, they were really into you. They found you really attractive. That happens to most of us, even if you're not that good looking. A few times in your life, and then it's really easy to kid yourself like, oh, I just need to repeat the circumstances that created that situation. You know what I mean? And so it's an empirical experience. It may be very powerful. And, your best friend, you may have seen them fall in love or seen someone fall in love with them. Or again, even if there wasn't even love, even if it was just someone who met you on a certain day in a certain way and they were really into you, it's easy to take that as a guide for what you should be doing. When really the exact opposite is true. It's very random on a human face-to-face level who finds you attractive, and there is no why. There is no reason why. It is kind of surprising to me how much my current girlfriend finds me attractive. And I got a real good comparison to that. So my girlfriend doesn't just find me attractive in real life, but we'll be looking through photographs of me, photographs we took together while on vacation, and she'll say, "Oh wow, you look really handsome in that photo," and I think I look like garbage in the photo. I some photos of me are flattering and some are unflattering, but a really unflattering photo of me, she will still think I'm hot in this awful photo of me, right? Now I remember, by contrast, when I was a student in Kunming, one of my teachers especially, photographs of mine were up. I made this poster, and also we had all the ID stuff. We had my passport, just part of the school. So different photos of me were on the table at different times of studying. And I remember she really went out of her way to let me know how ugly I looked in these photographs of me. Or sometimes she'd be like, "Ugh, that doesn't look like you at all," about photos. And it was like, wow. Because again, some of the photos I look bad, but some of them I look good. I was like, "What do you mean? I look good in that photo. What's the matter with you?" She's like, "Oh, it looks terrible," So it's very idiosyncratic who finds who attractive. And so we're currently living in China. It's easy to say beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and that beauty is a social construct, that it's to some extent specific to the culture you're living in. But if you just live in one culture, you may really be stuck with that struggle. You're stuck with the way you're perceived in that culture. I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, but China is a huge country. When I lived in Hong Kong, nobody found me attractive. Nobody even referred to me as attractive. And I mean two different categories there, because there's someone walking up to you on the street or at a cocktail party and hitting on you, letting you know that they find you attractive. That's one type of information. But another type of information is conversations with your boss or your coworkers where they refer to you as attractive, or even just the nature of the conversation is "Oh well, are you doing this or that or whatever." When I was in Hong Kong, nobody found me attractive. And then just a couple years later, my appearance was the same or worse. I think I was probably objectively less attractive. When I was living in Kunming, China, this is back in 2007, everyone found me attractive. And again, it was kind of both categories. There were both all these women directly hitting on me, sometimes directly propositioning me, but trying to spark up with me. But also those kinds of indirect conversations with coworkers and colleagues and that kind of thing, where it was being referred to as self-evident that I was really attractive, for this or that. And this both China and I looked the same in those two periods of my life. You know what I mean? Is it cultural context? Is it just luck? Is it just idiosyncrasy? Is it just random? You know what I mean? But the difference there was not me. If anything, I was better looking in the period when I was living in Hong Kong. I was really broke when I was living in Kunming. I don't know. Poverty's never attractive. I had a beard part of that time too and stuff. Anyway, whatever. So it's really, really easy to let these kind of anecdotal experiences lead you astray, whether they're your own anecdotal experience or there's someone else's anecdotal experience. Now, on a deeper level, I also think that in Western culture, we cultivate this misconception. It's a misconception we're proud of, that human attraction and pair bonding is based on the soul, or that it ought to be based on the soul. It ought to be based on who you really are. And we imagine who you really are is something totally different from just who you are. Like, what you do, what you say, your job, your hobbies, your interests. These are extrinsic and shallow things, and what you look like, your appearance. And then there's this idea, there's this separate category of who you really are, your spirit, your soul, your intrinsic essence, that allegedly somebody who wants to fuck you should be able to appreciate, even if it's in great contrast to who you are, in a shallower sense. Now, these things can overlap. The latter delusion, the delusion of the soul, what I call an essentialist approach to human personality, that there's an essence within your personality, which is your true self in contrast to your false self or something. That combines with the anecdotal nature of, this one time I had this one experience where this person really found me attractive. I had this one experience where this person fell in love with me. Like, you actually had a deeper connection with someone. And then adding to this delusion of those people who were really into me, it's because they could see who I really am. It's because they could see my soul. They saw something in me the other people didn't see. And I think that is wrong. You see the same thing my Chinese teacher saw, both in person and in the photographs, right? You like it, and she doesn't. You think it's attractive, she thinks it's repulsive, period. You know what I mean? You're responding to the same man and the same outward experience and the same combination of different shallow factors that makes up, who you are, what you have to offer as a partner, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I'm talking about this in a philosophical way, but the real moral of the story of what I'm saying here is that the discipline of making sense out of your own love life is keeping the shallow things shallow, like appreciating the shallow side of human experience as shallow, not looking for something deep where it can't be found. If somebody gives you the advice, which is maybe common advice, but isn't taken seriously enough, despite being common, that you should find someone you love, you should base your relationship on developing common interests, on interests you have in common. Now, I think in a really profound sense, this runs counter to the cultural idea of the soul, of the essence of who you really are. And it also runs counter to this notion that, like, society is one big competition for who's the prettiest, and that it's the most attractive people trying to pair off with the most attractive people to have the most attractive children or something. I really do not think that's what's going on. I mean,
there are thousands of examples of unattractive people getting together with attractive people to prove that wrong.
Yeah, and I think the point is...
two unattractive people getting together.
Right, sure. Ugly people get laid, and ugly people have happy marriages, and what have you. I mean, straight up ugly people. I think a lot of people are maybe scared of the feeling within themselves that they could fall in love with an ugly person. I think that's partly an ego trip. Like, am I lowering my social value? Am I damaging my own ego or my own worth if my girlfriend is less attractive than some standard I have set up in my own mind? Or for the woman, if her boyfriend is lower than some attractive. But you can fall in love with someone who's objectively unattractive. I think you can fall in love with someone who's subjectively unattractive, who you don't feel attracted to, but you overcome that because of some combination of other redeeming qualities they've got. But maybe that's scary to people in its own way too, right?
So finding common interests.
Yeah, what does it really mean creating and building on common interests? I think that's basically as deep as it gets for this kind of relationship advice. If you're a cancer researcher, you do research to try to find the cure for cancer, and then you meet someone else who's also passionate about cancer research, how important is their physical appearance going to be? It's going to be different for every couple. It's going to be different for every person. I'm not here to shame those people. It's possible someone's watching this video right now who's in a specialized field like that, and they said, well, all my life I assumed I wanted to be with another cancer researcher, but when I actually met these women or actually met these men, I found I couldn't feel attracted to them at all. Fine, And I think for some people, the question of whether or not they can feel attracted to someone might be really narrow. They might only be able to feel attracted to someone if certain conditions are met. There's a certain type, certain look, or what have you. And, there's no reason to lie to yourself about that. But I think you also shouldn't lie to yourself the other way, whether you're thinking about yourself, as a unique example in this process, or if you're scaling it up and thinking about society in general or life in general. Of course, if you care about something passionately, whether or not it's cancer research, or whether or not it's, painting or what have you, whether or not it's politics or what have you, and you meet someone else who relates to you on that level, who has those common aspirations with you, there's a lot to love there. I mean, there's a lot of common ground to build on. There's a lot, there's a lot that's going to smooth over and make it worthwhile for you to move into an apartment together and learn how to get along and have your first experience washing dishes together and have your first fight about the dry cleaning or who forgot to return their library books. Because, there are all kinds of little bumps in the road, when you're a couple. She smiles. You know what I'm talking about? But, when you have something profound and enduring, some kind of common ground like that, some kind of interest in common, that really creates the basis for the relationship. And I do think it's something, if you are objectively ugly, which, plenty of people are, plenty of people live with that burden their whole lives, or if within your own culture you're considered ugly, you're within a culture where only tall, skinny people are considered attractive and you're not tall and skinny, whatever the case may be. And that, again, that can be quite localized. That can be the sense of competition in your own culture, or it may just be the sense you're left over with from your own high school, who, a lot of people are shaped by little experiences like that are really even more specific than their culture in general, or where they're living in general. Nevertheless, it seems so clear to me that the way forward is for you to find and build on, some passionate direction of that kind, which is going to create the basis for those meaningful relationships. All right, sorry. I have two or three things to tag onto this. Two or three, caveats that I think are really significant. So one, I used to be married to an anthropologist. I used to be married to someone who had a PhD in anthropology. And I think it's actually worthwhile to reflect that sometimes you can have an interest in common with somebody, and it seems like a common interest, but it's really not, because what you're talking about is such a diverse category of things for which we use just one word in the English language. So like anthropology. My ex-wife, who were her coworkers and colleagues in anthropology, some of them were Christian missionaries. There are people with PhDs in anthropology, but they're going out to tribal areas and trying to convert ethnic minority peoples to Christianity. And for them, that's the meaning of life. But it's like, well, what do you have in common? Anthropology, or even a PhD in anthropology. And there were a lot of people in anthropology who were left-wing extremists, who were communists, who supported the Communist Party, and for whom anthropology is really about, proving communism. Now, I use an example I know nothing about when I say cancer research. I can't tell you, probably if you talk to people who are really in the cancer research dating pool, I think a lot of labels like that, you're going to have one word in the English language, but then when you look past that, it's really not just one interest. It's not common ground that's easy to build on when you really understand that people with very diverse motives and interests are brought in under that one tent, or brought in under that one heading. So you have to look beyond. Anthropology may be an exceptionally bad example, but I think that's an example worth thinking about, and for people to question for themselves their own interest if they're going to conferences or meetings or events for that interest and the pursuit of that interest, or are they really meeting people they have things that are profoundly in common. So we're both vegan, but we have a lot more in common than just veganism, right? Like if you make a list of all the examples, all the specific political issues addressed on this channel. So she got to see a couple hundred of my YouTube videos before she met me in person. So she knew we had all this in common.
Right. A surprising amount of things in common.
Yeah.
And then...
Well, wait, it was a surprise for me. I learned it out, and you learned it first, because you watched the YouTube videos and then we met. Yeah, but yeah.
Well, also, earlier you said, she smiles, because I'm not laughing about us not being able to get along with washing dishes.
It's just a process. Yeah.
Surprisingly, we've been really...
sure.
We've been able to get along really well.
We've been copacetic.
Yeah.
Copacetic is the word. I was just going to say, in terms of us having all that stuff in common, it would be hard to make a full list of all those issues. But it's like we're both into veganism. We're not into street protests. We're not into smashing windows.
Neither of us drink or do drugs.
Yeah, that is true. Oh, no, that's also a huge one. Sure, we're both basically anti-drug, anti-tobacco, anti-alcohol, what have you. Right, we both don't watch hockey. I mean, there's an enormous list of things we have in common. But my point was going to be just within the vegan category. Okay, we both don't want to adopt dogs.
Yeah.
We don't. That's a huge one. So, like, there are people, and there are Facebook groups which are just vegans who are heavily into pet ownership, where all their time is devoted to. They have 6 dogs and 5 rabbits, and they've rescued a bunch of rats. There are people who have rats in their apartment. There are people who are raising chickens. There are vegans, but where their time is running this small farm. Inside their apartment or in their backyard. We're not like that.
Yeah, we're not just into it for health reasons too.
Right? Okay, that's another great example. Right. So, like, my point is here, whether it's anthropology, including everything from, like, conservative Christians to left-wing extremist communists, or it's veganism. Veganism seems really specific, but when you get down to it, like, okay, you want to date, you want to meet someone else because they're a vegan activist or an aspiring vegan activist. Well, what does that really mean? And politically or practically, like, I literally don't think I could live with a woman who had a bunch of pets. I don't want to live in the same space with a bunch of animals like that. But, and it's not hard to think of, a parallel universe where I ended up in that situation, right? But no. So, yeah, even within veganism, there are those kinds of questions to dig down to. I mean, this issue of common interests, of having kind of a known declared common interest, and you're then kind of dating inside that interest. I think it really does run counter to this notion of the essential self, the soul, the spirit, who you really are, right? And I think, on the other hand, I mean, I'm going to use my own experience getting married and getting divorced too, in a self-critical way there. You can say, when my ex-wife met me, I was a scholar of Buddhism. Now she wasn't, but she respected that. She wanted to know more about that. She knew basically nothing about Buddhism when she met me. She had met some other people. She had met some people in her PhD program who, also had some engagement with Buddhism. So, you can really say that I let her down, or that I, invalidated part of the basis for the relationship when I ceased to be a scholar of Buddhism, when I quit that field and moved into a new field, right? Now, my ex-wife has never said that to me. She's never said, like, she fell out of love with me or felt differently about me or regarded me differently because I stopped being a scholar of Buddhism. And I assume we'll never have a conversation like that now that we're divorced. There were a million other things that happened in that relationship. There were a million other factors to consider. But nevertheless, I've got to say self-critically, I think that is a reason to leave me. I think that is a reason to break up the relationship. I think you can say, well, look, the common interest, or what part of the basis of the relationship was, for whatever, 10 years plus, I was a scholar of Buddhism. I worked on Pali. I worked on Southeast Asia, this kind of stuff. And then that all came to a halt. Now, she was very much part of those discussions. It's not like I sprung it on her as a surprise. But again, there's nothing intrinsic here. There's nothing essential. I'm not in a position to say to my ex-wife, well, you're supposed to love me for me. You're supposed to love me for who I really am. You're supposed to love me for my soul or spirit. No, you fell in love with a Pali scholar, with a scholar of Theravada Buddhism. And now I'm stopping that and looking for the rest of my life. Like, it's not a temporary thing. Like, I'm quitting that field and I'm going in other directions. Now, I think a lot of people are made to feel ashamed of that in Christian culture. Like, if you fall in love with your husband because he has a good job as an aircraft pilot, and then later his vision gets worse, he can't be an aircraft pilot anymore, you're supposed to feel like a piece of shit because you married him because he's an aircraft pilot. Now you don't want to be with him anymore that he's not an aircraft pilot. Like, I understand. Like, there's a thing there, and I think it is based on this, like, Christian culture of suffering and support. Like, no, like, you're supposed to have this profound connection with this guy that has nothing to do with the fact that he's an aircraft pilot. But you got to be real with yourself. Maybe it does. That's what attracted to you, or that was the basis for the relationship. I don't know. Maybe the husband's an aircraft pilot and the wife works in aircraft design or aircraft engine repair, whatever. I don't know why, but now he's no longer in that field. He's doing something totally different. That matters. That's not, intrinsic or essential or what have you.
But go ahead.
Okay. I think that a lot of people get behind this competitive view of evolutionary biology. Like, everyone's trying to be as pretty as possible. Everyone's trying to be as handsome and as muscular as possible, and so on, because it gives them the comforting delusion that there's one finish line, one standard, one set of goalposts that we're all working towards. Like, there's one standard of beauty, and the struggle is to be as beautiful as possible. Or there's one standard of success, like commercial success, and we're working towards it. And, maybe that makes sense to people also in terms of the high school experience. Like in your high school, maybe there are only 5 or 10 people you find attractive, and then there's a sense of a closed competition, for these limited resources of who can be the handsomest or the strongest or the prettiest or the most successful. And there are only a couple ways to be successful. Like maybe you can be successful in sports or something like bodybuilding, and maybe you can be successful in getting high grades or seeming promising in terms of your career options. And there's really limited horizons, really limited form of competition. Now, there's a sense in which even high school is not really like that. It's just one way to perceive high school. But definitely once you join the adult world, it's not like that. A lot of people, it seems like harmless advice to just say, well, be as fit as you can possibly be as pretty as you can possibly be, as strong as you can possibly be, as lean or as muscular or whatever these things are. That presumes that you know the nature of the competition and you know what it is that you're competing for, right? I could not imagine the woman that YouTube brought into my life. Like, there was no way I could have contrived my life or put on a fake persona or done a fake career or anything to try to attract you as my partner, right? I came on YouTube. I kept it really real. I talked about my actual political beliefs that were alienating to a lot of people. Like, a lot of people look at my political beliefs and they think, oh, is he left wing? Is he right wing? What's the deal with this guy? My political beliefs don't fall into some simple, box. My views on veganism alienate the vast majority of vegans. The vast majority of vegans find my views on veganism offensive. But I was honest about that stuff. There's no sense in which I can say, like, I'm out here trying to be the best version of myself. You heard that shit? Like, you really got to think about that. That's a mode of thinking where there's already a presumed ideal you're working towards, whether it's a finish line or goalposts or standard of beauty or standard of success. I can work on developing what I'm really interested and passionate about, and then I can find out who has common ground with me. Like, I didn't even know about you for the first couple months we were together, that one of the things you really related to was my interest in First Nations peoples. So Cree, Ojibwe, Dene, native peoples of Canada, native languages and stuff, right? And I'm coming here on YouTube just talking about that from the position of a failure. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, this is something I tried to do with my life, and it didn't work out. And that brought this woman in my life. That was one of the things that really turned her on about me, that she really related to positively, right? So nobody's going to give you that advice. Like, talk about your aspirations and failures and meet people who can relate positively to that aspiration and failure. But it's great advice. You know what I mean? Sorry, this was, I think, really the final point. You can jump in if you got something to say, but, this is really the final point I wanted to make here. One of the really interesting dynamic things is that this issue of common ground as a basis for romance, love, etc., it doesn't just rely on things you've actually accomplished. So before I hit record, I mentioned to my girlfriend, look, we've fallen in love. We have this now really stable, high commitment, long-term relationship. And part of the basis is that at the time we met, I was an aspiring vegan activist, and she was an aspiring vegan activist. What have we actually accomplished in terms of those aspirations? Almost nothing. And it's completely possible that due to circumstance in the future, what will we accomplish in future in terms of our aspirations for vegan activism? The answer may be nothing. Like, it may be we both just get jobs that demand our attention 24/7, that due to, professional or family obligations. Okay, let's say my mom gets sick, and then we decide to take care of my mom in the last couple of years of her life or something, in her old age and illness, and you get pregnant, and I get a job at the CIA, whatever, and, the CIA says, look, we don't like you doing this YouTube shit in your spare time, whatever. Whatever the scenario is. Okay, nevertheless, we were brought together by that positive aspiration, and we'll stay together. Like, it doesn't rely on us pursuing that, and it doesn't rely on any actual accomplishments, right? And the First Nations thing, I think, is a really powerful example of that also. Like, to some extent, she knows who I am. She knows what kind of person I am. She knows what I'm going to do and what I'm capable of because of my experience trying to do something positive for First Nations languages, even though what I accomplished was like this much, and I can make a video talking about that. You know what I mean? That was basically a failure. I enrolled at First Nations University, whatever, and I just have videos on YouTube talking about my feelings under that heading. You know what I mean? There's no promise of me accomplishing there. But the fact that I cared about that, the fact that I tried to accomplish that, and then you know about that and you relate to that, that's also part of the positive basis of the relationship. But it doesn't rely on any actually existing thing. It doesn't rely on me having money in the bank or me driving a fancy car or, me having the right tattoos or me being able to bench press 300 pounds, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't rely on me having been. So that's a really interesting dynamic. And I think there are pretty clear reasons to why that is. When you fall in love with someone, you want to have a sense of who they are. You want to have a sense of who in future they're going to become. You want to have a sense of their potential. You want to, is this someone who's going to end up as a lazy drunk watching sports on the couch? That's a big percentage of guys. They may look good in high school. 10 years later, the guy's a lazy drunk. In high school, he was lean and muscular and was on the football team. 10 years later, he's drinking beer on the couch watching some other football team. You know what I mean? This is a very common pattern for men, right? Their potential for who they are, what kind of a partner they can be and what they're going to do in life. A lot of that is about those intangibles. Although, again, those intangibles, I think it's really important to view them as shallow, not to think of them in terms of the soul or the spirit or as something essential, but just as those common interests and what you can build on. That is everything I have to say. Okay? We killed this video. It's done.
You killed the video.
Okay. Yeah, I think overall this was more flattering than denigrating to you in our relationship. No, I think this gives a good view of our relationship for people who say, yeah. Okay. All right, that's a wrap.
À-bas-le-ciel.